8:05 p.m. Michael Axworthy, who served as head of the Iran section at the Foreign Office 1998 to 2000, has a withering assessment of Mr. Trump's stance on Iran. Trump often refers to history. In his scattergun way, he called the NAFTA trade deal the worst trade deal in history, and the JCPOA the worst deal. A moment's thought about some of the other agreements that have been signed in the past, Munich springs to mind, shows how absurd those comments are. Someone who apparently does not read books, as Trump himself says, might be more reticent about historical pronouncements. But if Trump knows little of history, history is, unfortunately, going to be bothered with him. And acting to destroy the Iran nuclear deal is likely to go down as one of the most stupid things an American president has ever done. 7:54 p.m. President Hassan Rouhani of Iran accused Mr. Trump of delivering insults and baseless accusations in his speech. He said the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps was essential for defending his nation against terrorism, and the popular chant's "Death to America" was singled out by Mr. Trump as evidence of Iran's hatred were not directed at the American people but U.S. policies. He said the U.S. is more isolated than ever and could not unilaterally change the deal. 7:44 p.m. Donald Trump speaks to reporters after delivering Iran's speech. Donald Trump added some more comments on Iran as he left the White House for Beltsville, Maryland. "We will see what happens with Iran. We're very unhappy with Iran. They have not treated us with the kind of respect that they should be treating. They should have thanked Barack Obama for making that kind of deal. They were gone. They were economically gone. He gave them $1.7 billion in cash, and they should be thank you, President Obama. They didn't say that. Fact check: the Obama regime did indeed send the money, which was a payment for a 1970s weapons deal that had been blocked for decades by sanctions." 7:36 p.m. Emily Thornberry, Shadow Foreign Secretary, said Mr. Trump's stance was reckless. "It is an act of wanton vandalism for Donald Trump to jeopardize the future of the deal today, and to move the goalposts by linking it to important but utterly extraneous issues around Iran's wider activities in the region. It is also totally disingenuous to suggest that the deal just needs to be fixed, when the only evidence that it is anyway broken is inside Donald Trump's head." 7:33 p.m. Major Adrian Rankin-Iglaway, a Pentagon spokesman, told Reuters the Pentagon was assessing the positioning of its forces as well as planning, but offered few details after Mr. Trump promised a more confrontational response. "We are identifying new areas where we will work with allies to put pressure on the Iranian regime, neutralize its destabilizing influences, and constrain its aggressive power projection, particularly its support for terrorist groups and militants," he said. 7:27 p.m. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu congratulated Mr. Trump for his speech, seeing an opportunity to change the 2015 nuclear deal with Tehran as well as Iranian conduct in the region. He boldly confronted Iran's terrorist regime and created an opportunity to fix this bad deal, to roll back Iran's aggression, and to confront its criminal support of terrorism, he said in a Facebook video. 7:07 p.m. In a joint statement, Theresa May, Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron have reiterated the commitment to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action as the Iran nuclear deal is formally known, and urged the U.S. to think hard before taking further steps that might undermine it further. We, the leaders of France, Germany and the United Kingdom, take note of President Trump's decision not to recertify Iran's compliance with a Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action to Congress and are concerned by the possible implications. We stand committed to the JCPOA and its full implementation by all sides. Preserving the JCPOA is in our shared national security interest. The nuclear deal was the culmination of 13 years of diplomacy and was a major step towards ensuring that Iran's nuclear program is not diverted for military purposes. The JCPOA was unanimously endorsed by the UN Security Council in Resolution 2231. The International Atomic Energy Agency has repeatedly confirmed Iran's compliance with the JCPOA through its long-term verification and monitoring program. Therefore, we encourage the U.S. administration and Congress to consider the implications to the security of the U.S. and its allies before taking any steps that might undermine the JCPOA, such as reimposing sanctions on Iran lifted under the agreement. At the same time as we work to preserve the JCPOA, we share concerns about Iran's ballistic missile program and regional activities that also affect our European security interests. We stand ready to take further appropriate measures to address these issues in close cooperation with the US and all relevant partners. We look to Iran to engage in constructive dialogue to stop destabilizing actions and work towards negotiated solutions. 7:01 p.m. John McCain, one of the most influential Republicans on foreign policy, has been a frequent critic of Donald Trump. Not today. The goals President Trump presented in his speech today are a welcomed long overdue change. They offer the United States a path forward that centers our policy towards Iran on its destabilizing regional ambitions rather than its nuclear program alone. I look forward to learning more about the specifics of this strategy, and the Senate Armed Services Committee will conduct thorough oversight of our military's role in it. 6:56 p.m. 6:54 p.m. Saudi Arabia welcomed the new U.S. policy towards Iran and said lifting sanctions had allowed Iran to develop its ballistic missile program and step up its support for militant groups, state news agency SPA reported on Friday. The kingdom said Iran took advantage of additional financial revenues to support for the Lebanese Shia movement Hezbollah and the Houthi group in Yemen. 6:51 p.m. Federica Mogherini credit app Federica Mogherini, the EU foreign policy chief, has given her reaction, saying the 8 inspections have so far shown Iran in compliance with a nuclear deal. There have been no violations of any of the commitments included in the agreement, she said. The deal has prevented and continues to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. She added that the U.S. president has many powers but that no single country has the authority to nullify the deal. The international community, and the EU with it, has clearly indicated that the deal is and will continue to be in place, she said. 6:42 p.m. A lot of confusion about what has changed with U.S. stance towards the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps (IRGC). In advance briefings, officials said they would stop short of designating it a foreign terrorist organization. But the language from the U.S. Treasury sounds as if it has gone the whole way. Trump administration to sanction Iran's IRGC in its entirety for supporting terrorism and the odds force, say senior U.S. officials. Mark Dubowitz at Dubowitz October 13, 2017. The IRGC is already heavily sanctioned. Not clear these new designations will have any practical effect. Josh Rogin at Josh Rogin October 13, 2017. 6:35 p.m. at POTUS keeps promise pushes back on Iran deal that should never have been made. Appeasement. No longer U.S. policy. Gov. Mike Huckabee at Gov. Mike Huckabee October 13, 2017. The Iran blunder was Obama's. He strengthened an enemy and obliterated sanctions without building the consensus the treaty process requires. David French at David A. French October 13, 2017. 6:32 p.m. Mr. Trump's words today seem to be something of a fudge after he backed himself into a corner by denouncing the Iran agreement during the election campaign as the worst deal in America's history. As president, he has to certify the deal every 90 days, putting him in a painful position when all indications are that Iran is in compliance. Unable to rip up the agreement and unwilling to approve it, Mr. Trump has instead punted it to Congress for them to consider the next step. In all likelihood, it will not impose fresh sanctions, leaving the deal in place and the clock ticking to the next deadline when Mr. Trump is faced with certifying the deal again. In the meantime, expect rapid moves to build in those automatic triggers that would essentially take certification out of the president's hands. Nothing would change, except that Mr. Trump is spared the agony of having to publicly endorse a deal he railed against. 6:15 p.m. More on the U.S. Treasury's move to classify the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, a major part of the country's regime and economy, as a supporter of terrorist organizations. Stephen Mnuchin, Treasury Secretary, said the IRGC has played a central role to Iran becoming the world's foremost state sponsor of terror. Iran's pursuit of power comes at the cost of regional stability, and Treasury will continue using its authorities to disrupt the IRGC's destructive activities. We are designating the IRGC for providing support to the IRGC-QF, the key Iranian entity enabling Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's relentless campaign of brutal violence against his own people, as well as the lethal activities of Hezbollah, Hamas, and other terrorist groups. We urge the private sector to recognize that the IRGC permeates much of the Iranian economy, and those who transact with controlled companies do so at great risk. 6:10 p.m. Mr. Trump says Iran's dangerous aggression has only increased since the 2015 nuclear deal, as he goes on to announce that he will not certify Tehran's compliance based on the factual record I have put forward. I am announcing that we cannot and will not make this certification. We will not continue down a path whose predictable outcome is more terror and violence, as well as an Iranian nuclear weapon, he said. 6:06 p.m. Iran is not living up to the spirit of the nuclear deal, says Mr. Trump, announcing a four-pronged strategy. Work with allies to counter destabilizing activities, place additional sanctions on regime, address proliferation of missiles that threaten neighbors, deny regime all paths to nuclear weapons. 6:03 p.m. Mr. Trump has turned his attention to the nuclear deal, saying the same mindset that produced this deal also produced terrible trade deals that cost U.S. jobs. He claims lifting sanctions freed up cash that Iran has used to pay for destabilizing operations throughout the Middle East. He also references a famous episode in which hundreds of millions of dollars was delivered to Iran by the U.S. government. I wonder where all that money went, he said. Worst of all, the deal allows Iran to continuing developing certain elements of its nuclear program. 5:59 p.m. New sanctions are already posted on the U.S. Treasury website, including Chinese companies and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. 5:54 p.m. Donald Trump opens by saying his number one priority is the safety and security of the United States, which is why he ordered a complete strategic review policy towards the rogue regime of Iran. His aim is to ensure that Iran can never, and I mean never, acquire nuclear weapons. 5:52 p.m. 5:51 p.m. The nuclear deal is the latest multilateral agreement Mr. Trump has tried to leave or destroy, such as the Paris Climate Accords or the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The best analogy may, however, be the North American Free Trade Agreement. After saying the U.S. would pull out, he is now trying to renegotiate. 5:40 p.m. Mr. Trump's tougher stance on Iran is expected to bring tough sanctions on the regime's non-nuclear activities. Sources are briefing that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps will be designated a foreign terrorist organization in an effort to rein in its destabilizing role across the Middle East. 5:04 p.m. There is no sunset in the Iran deal. Iran has renounced nuclear weapons and will be strictly monitored by the IAEA. Forever, Gerard Arad at Gerard Arad, October 13, 2017. One of Mr. Trump's concerns is what happens when the deal lapses. However, the French ambassador to the U.S. says it locks Iran into monitoring indefinitely. 5:10 p.m. True to his reality TV show mentality, Mr. Trump couldn't resist trailing his Iran announcement in a speech this morning. 5:09 p.m. The nuclear deal does not mean the Trump administration cannot impose sanctions on Iran. The Associated Press has this guide to sanctions brought in since the deal was signed in at least 5 separate actions. The Trump administration has placed sanctions on more than 70 Iranian and non-Iranian people and companies that it says support Iran's ballistic missile program or other activities, such as cyber attacks. Typically, the designation means blocking any assets the people and companies might have in the United States. Those targeted cannot access the U.S. financial system or deal with U.S. companies and are subject to secondary sanctions, meaning the United States could blacklist foreign companies and individuals who deal with them. In 2016, former President Barack Obama's administration also announced at least 2 sets of sanctions involving Iran's ballistic missile program. Most targets of the sanctions are Iranian, but they also include companies and entities based in China, Lebanon, Ukraine and the United Arab Emirates, as well as individuals from Britain and China. 5:00 p.m. James Sorin, the chief executive of BICOM, the Britain-Israel Communications and Research Center, has this on the view from Israel. Only Israel's prime minister supports Trump's view that Iran is violating the agreement. But Israel's security establishment is increasingly challenging the position. Given a choice between an imperfect deal and no deal, they opt from the status quo because it offers years of relative stability vis-a-vis Iran's nuclear capability, something no other option can provide. The U.S. Defense Secretary General Mattis and the National Security Advisor General McMaster agree with their Israeli colleagues and have tried to convince President Trump to stick with the deal. 4:49 p.m. There is also criticism from the right. Danielle Plepka, Senior Vice President for Foreign and Defense Policy Studies at the American Enterprise, says if rolling back and diminishing Iranian power is the priority Mr. Trump insists it is, simply dumping the nuclear agreement in Congress' lap may be the worst possible option. That would be politically easy, but it won't get the job done. 4:47 p.m. High-profile Democrats have begun criticizing Mr. Trump's new position, pointing out that there is no evidence Iran is not complying with the nuclear deal. Reminder: the U.S. military, intel community and our allies all report Iran is complying with the deal. Trump's action pointless and dangerous. Ben Rhodes at Rhodes, October 13, 2017.